Well, perfect. Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Brian Sutherland, Industry Principal for Commercial at Yardi Systems. I sit out of our Santa Barbara, California office. And in my role, I oversee the commercial product from a sales and marketing perspective and sit between our clients, the product managers, the product developers, and the sales and marketing team. Today, I am very fortunate to be joined by Paul Gaines, Managing Director of Asset Management at Acesso Partners. I was going through my notes, and Paul and I met just close to a year ago, actually, August 19th, 2019, actually at a Yankee game in New York City, where he came to one of the Yardi events to hear about some of our product and to network with other executives. Paul, I wanted to thank you so much for coming to today's session. If you wouldn't mind just giving a quick professional background of yourself, and then we would love to hear a little bit about Acesso before we jump out into the panel.
Sure, thanks, Brian. I've been in the real estate business since about 1978. Worked for a number of institutional partners, such as Heller, GE, Equitable, and then kind of transitioned into more of the entrepreneurial companies. Currently working for Acesso Partners, which is based out of South Florida. My office is actually in Atlanta. And we own about 16 million square feet of office product. And it's contained mostly in Midwest, Southeast, Texas, and along the Eastern Corridor from Philadelphia through the Carolinas. Large concentration in Chicago, Minneapolis, and again, here in Atlanta. We have about 200 employees, and we have a combination of acquisition, accounting, asset management, and property management. And I apologize, but I hear myself echoing in my ear, so it's a little hard.
Sorry, Paul, to hear that. No, we can hear you just fine. So if you can battle hearing yourself through the echo, we can hear you just fine. So just thank you.
Give me 1 second.
Yep.
All right, we're good.
Perfect.
Go ahead.
Well, good. So I think to start our conversations, we have 30 minutes, which isn't a lot of time. I was hoping to chat with you a lot longer. I think when we did our prep call, I think we chatted for well over 30 minutes, and it seemed to fly by. And so wanted to talk to you maybe about, we'll start with the early stages of the pandemic. And obviously the pandemic is what's on people's mind and has been kind of the forefront of the current challenges that we're going through, and then also just moving forward, what we're going to be faced with from a leasing perspective, from an office absorption perspective, and from an overall performance perspective. So can you give us a sense of kind of what your role was within the Acesso organization during the early stages and chatting with tenants and so forth?
Sure. It's been a pretty big challenge. Back in March, we started to hear from a significant number of our tenants. I would tell you that across the portfolio, there was probably 150 tenants or so that contacted us and basically said, can't pay our rent. We've been sending people home, working from home. Our businesses have been impacted, and we are really in a position of not being able to pay rent. We asked them to do three things. One was to look at their insurance coverages for business interruption. Second thing was to apply for government assistance. Third thing would be send us all your financials, all your historicals, and we would put a plan together to see if that would work. It took a little while, and we got everybody to pay March, we got everybody to pay April, and then the negotiations really started. We probably wound up doing 35 amendments to our leases. And that was primarily on the retail side. Let's see. And sort of backtracked on me here. The retail side and some of our tenants that were more closely tied to either co-working or schools oriented, meaning that they were doing in-house training for Excel, Argus, things like that, where they were shut down. The hardest part there was trying to accommodate everybody's needs. We only have limited resources. So we tried to accommodate the people and the tenants that needed the most help. So if they were owned by a private equity firm, we said, go to your private equity. If they had taken everybody home, but their business was open and just they didn't want to pay rent because they weren't using the space, again, we told them we couldn't help them. We really focused on the tenants that truly, truly needed help because we don't have unlimited resources. So it became a little bit of a drawn out process. And by the end of May, I think we had done 35 amendments. And I felt pretty good about the tenants we work with. We got everybody settled in. They're paying accordingly. We pretty much didn't do any abatements. We did deferrals. So we defer 3, 4, 5 months of rent. Potentially they paid taxes and operating in the meantime. And then we gave them 12 to 24 months to pay us back. And we'll see, hopefully people will pick back up and they'll pay us back as agreed.
Yeah. So have any of those deferrals kicked in? Meaning if you did a 2 or 3 month deferrals and those repayment plans have essentially started at this point. What do you see?
They're starting now.
Okay. Okay. So I guess to be determined as far as
to be determined.
Okay.
And honestly, one of the things we were concerned about was the tenants thought that by now we'd all be in a better position. But clearly the cases are rising. The cities are still having issues. Some of them have continued to shut down. Businesses have not returned. So we're waiting to see if there's a second wave of requests that come in now.
Yeah.
Our collections to date have been 96, 97% across the portfolio. Okay. So we've done really well.
Yeah.
But again, this isn't what people expected.
Now, did you have, I guess, different conversations depending on who the tenants were, and maybe it was a national tenant versus a smaller, startup?
Yeah.
And can you maybe
absolutely. The national tenants, whether it was a national law firm, was easier to deal with. Tell them we just couldn't help them. If it was a retail tenant, such as a Starbucks, we got their typical letter that said we're not paying rent. We rejected that, and they are paying rent. We've had some larger retail tenants that are national in one of our properties, and we have fought with them a little bit over the fact that they didn't want to pay rent, and we turned to them and said, we expect you to pay rent. If firms were owned by private equity firms, we basically said, look, we're not your private equity firm. We're a landlord. We have to pay our lender. We have to pay the bills. We have to keep the building open and running. So we pushed them back to the private equity. We dealt with the firms that were more local, not necessarily mom and pop, but local, maybe a 3-person law firm, a business that was non-for-profit that said their collections or their charitable contributions are down and they're struggling. So we try to work with them a little bit closer.
Yeah. So how are you managing those conversations? And it sounds like there was kind of a first wave of requests. Not all of those turned into an actual deferral, but just understanding what the tenant's needs are, understanding what sort of accommodations that you should maybe make as a landlord. But how are you really managing that process and tracking that?
The first decision that we made was not to handle it on the local level. So our asset managers would be the first point of contact along with our property managers, but then they sent the request directly to me and we tracked them all. And then I was in meetings with our CFO and our senior management team, and we met every week. And we made decisions based upon some of the criteria as to who the tenant was, what their true needs were, and then also in conjunction with the rest of the portfolio. We felt if we did it in individual offices and they didn't have the benefit of seeing what was going on with the rest of the company, we'd be in a position of giving relief all over the portfolio, not realizing the impact. And so we did it centralized, and then we had conversations. We had a number of phone calls directly with the tenants, and we explained to them why we were doing what we were doing and why we either rejected it or what we could do. Because obviously most times they would ask for a 10-month abatement and we'd go back with a 3-month deferral. But we had no issue making phone calls and talking to them and explaining it to them.
Yeah.
I figured that was the best way.
So what's your sense on, these deferrals that are coming in, and I guess the current state of the pandemic, and regionally certain areas being impacted more heavily than others as far as office reentry and so forth? What's kind of your general sense of how things are going?
I'm laughing because Chicago is one of our bigger markets. They continue to struggle with the pandemic. Texas, we have properties in Houston and Dallas, same issue. We have our main office in South Florida and some property in Florida, same issue. I'm here in Atlanta. Georgia's cases are right. So we don't seem to have been in a good city where we haven't had a reoccurrence or a push upwards of additional cases. We've kept every single building open. We've never closed the building. And so it was more based on the tenants and the local government to say it's either a stay-at-home order or essential employees only. So we've kept it all open. We've put plans in place to keep the building safe, to make sure they've been cleaned properly. We've hired excess cleaning staff. We have all the CDC requirements in place, whether it's touch points, elevator, ID, which says social distance. We have masks in the buildings. We have signage all over. And our team is on site and setting the example. Sometimes we're faced with having to deal with somebody's employee who's tested positive, which is a challenge in itself, because you can only divulge so much information to the tenants in the building, but you have to make them aware. So it's no names, not even the name of the company, not necessarily the elevator bank. You can just say that somebody in the building has tested positive, and it happened on this date, and the employee was in the building last on such and such a date, and that's about all you can tell. So that's a bit of a challenge, but we've put all this in place. We put a task force together early on that said, how do you return to the buildings? We've had calls with all the tenants. We've had, as I say, the signage posted, security is there to tell people, what's happening. We've done the best we can. Communication is the key. Yeah. They have to let their employees know that it's a safe environment if they choose to come in.
So you mentioned a task force. One question I was going to ask you was as far as executive engagement at Acesso and kind of how you guys have come together as an organization. You mentioned a couple hundred employees, but really how have you navigated such a challenging and fluid market?
Well, like everybody else, most of us are working from home. As you can see from the background, this is my office in my house. Our executive team and our accounting group returned to the headquarters probably 5 weeks ago, but most of the other group, other than our property managers, are still working from home. And even the headquarters shuffles in and out depending upon social distancing in the office, things like that. So Teams on Microsoft has been a big help. And we took our executive meetings, which were typically once a month, they became once a week. And we did Teams meetings once a week. We went over the status of the buildings, and that was with property management, that was with asset management, our whole senior team, including myself, and our acquisition team. Acquisitions were down, and our investment team was really pitching in to help along with it, as we really weren't out buying new properties for a little while. So we decided to include everybody. So we put a task force together, which included all the different disciplines in the company, and came up with a game plan on how to address the issues as far as back to work, keeping the building safe, and communicating all this out to the tenants in all the different buildings. So it's been constant communication. Well, as I said, we tracked all the rent reliefs. We tracked the responses, the amendments. Everything that had to go into this was done in conjunction with every member of the senior staff and every executive. So again, and we're still doing it. I would tell you that we're down to every other week right now, but that remains to be seen. If, as this keeps going on, we may go back to once a week. Yeah. But we decided communication with the tenants in the building and the market's the most important thing right now.
Absolutely. Yeah, I could say on the Yardi side, we certainly have embraced, Microsoft Teams and been in there, and we fortunately had made that shift right before the pandemic to be on there. But it's been, I would say, mission critical to our organization to stay in contact and to communicate, and quite frankly, to be able to connect and see each other's faces. It's been fantastic. From an IT perspective, what sort of tools do you guys have in place to kind of help you get through this? You mentioned Teams. What else have you guys
We
been
use
doing?
Teams. We actually have leasing meetings with all of our leasing teams on a weekly basis throughout the different offices, and that's either on Zoom, or it's on Teams, or it's on some platform that allows us to all do what we're doing here. And then from a standpoint of tracking everything, I mean, the Yardi system has been essential. We've been able to put everything onto Deal Manager. We continue to track all the new leases. We actually signed in excess of 35 leases from probably January, February on through the end of May, beginning of June. Now, a lot of those were renewals that were already underway, but there have been a significant number of new deals done. So we've been able to track all that progress on there. But just as importantly, we've used the system to track the negotiations on the deferrals as well. I keep hearing an echo in my ear, I'm sorry. We track the deferrals, we track the negotiations on there. We've put a category like a risk or at risk, and we're tracking every one of those and the progress. And now as they're coming up to the end of the deferral period, it gives us the opportunity to see if the tenants are starting to pay or they've come back for a second bite at the apple.
Yeah.
So that's been critical because it's not just myself or the asset manager, but every one of our executives has access to that platform. So they don't have to call us, they pull it up, they go through the list, and then all we get is questions as opposed to tell us everything that's going on. So they zero in on some of the key tenants by using the platform. Everybody in the company has access to it, and that's been essential.
Yeah, it's been interesting because we built out the risk ratings a while back, but didn't know the power of those in a down market, right? Or in a fluid market, and the ability to kind of classify your tenants and put them into certain buckets, I think has been extremely valuable.
Yeah, it's been unbelievable that we've been able to do it that way.
Yeah. Good. So we kind of looked in the rearview mirror, if you will, and talked about kind of what happened post-pandemic, how you guys adapted to things. You mentioned some new lease execution that's been happening. Any sort of tenant requests that you guys are having that would be different, modifications to force majeure or other, clauses that they want built in there? Anything comical even that might have happened?
Yeah, you're starting to see the input from the new leases as the attorneys are trying to guide their tenants. We have a number of the new ones where they try to slide in that, pandemics to allow them not to pay rent, which of course we struck. Everybody's trying to sneak in that language that would allow them to do all these deferrals because they came to us initially and said, under force majeure, we don't have to pay rent. And I can only speak to our leases, but every one of them said, force majeure includes this, this, and this, everything except the non-payment of rent. And so that's been a little bit of an eye-opener for them. So now they're coming back trying to insert language that says, in fact, it does include, and we're striking it off. But mostly the tenant requests have been to either, and it's a little bit of both, that they're going to need additional space because they want their employees to come back, but they need to spread out. In other cases, they've wanted to downsize because they said, we're going to stagger the employees, every other week, twice a week, or every other day, whatever it might be. And they're going to do a lot of hoteling. So they don't need all the space all of a sudden. And where they had the collaborative space, they're not going to use it. So they'd rather use that as a way of spreading people out. So again, a little bit of both there. They've also, we're in the process of doing some extensions, whether they're 3 to 5 years. They've been coming back saying we only want to do 1 or 2 right now because we're not sure where this is going to take us. They've also said that we're looking at going from downtown to the suburbs, at least on a satellite office. So maybe they don't need all their downtown space because some people will work out of the suburbs 1 or 2 days a week. And that's all a factor of mass transit. Nobody wants to do, the train ride in from the Chicago suburbs into downtown Chicago. They also are trying to evaluate going into high-rise elevator buildings as opposed to 3 or 4 stories where they could use stairwells, or you don't